early quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end rankings this week, all over the YouTube channel, all over our podcast feed. Dave Kluge and I have combined our redraft fantasy rankings to create a very small consensus ranking with a whole bunch of tiers. And we're going to talk about the players that we think stand out the most to us, either positively or negatively. I can't even speak. I'm so excited to get this started. You guys can use this info however you want, whether it's drafting in best ball, getting a leg up on your competition for your fantasy leagues, and just tracking how the hype changes throughout the year. Dave, let's not waste any more time. Let's hop into it. Our top 48 wide receiver rankings. We're going to have to move fast because this is a lot of players.
We got to call in an hour.
Yeah, we got to hurry up.
We got
to get out of here.
Warp speed.
All right, here we go. Ready? Tier number 1, CeeDee Lamb at 1, Tyreek Hill at 2, Jamar Chase at 3. Now, do you think anyone else belongs in this tier? Anyone else that we might be missing?
Yes. Amon-Ra St.Brown. I think Amon-Ra St.Brown is absolutely in this tier. Again, this is a guy, we talked about it with Isaiah Pacheco on the episode that we recorded earlier, how like people were just like, oh, draft capital. This can't keep happening. Well, at a certain point, you just need to throw those conceptions out the window. I mean, Tyreek Hill, 6th-round pick. We're looking at him as the number 2 guy off the board this year. And Amon-Ra St.Brown has just been an absolute animal. So yeah, he's in the same tier as Lamb, Chase, and Hill for me. He's a target hog, top 10 in just every usage metric you could possibly look at: target share, targets per route run, snap share, slot usage, total targets, you name it. He was 2nd in receptions. He was 4th in the EPA. He was a wide receiver 3 in fantasy last year. Right now, I've got him as my 105 off the board, same tier as Lamb, Chase, and Hill, and taking him right behind Christian McCaffrey. So for me, this is where I want to be picking in drafts this year. It's 5th overall, so I can just let Amon-Ra St.Brown, who I believe has every opportunity to finish as this year's wide receiver 1, just fall into my lap.
I don't think that's the name that many people expected you to say. And as we get into our tier number 2, like you mentioned, at number 4, we've got Amon-Ra St.Brown. At 5, Justin Jefferson. 6, Puka Nacua. 7, A.J. Brown. 8, Garrett Wilson. And at 9, Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, before we get into talking about those players and getting to our next tiers, I want to remind you guys, there are tons of ways you can enjoy our show. And we're bringing you videos all throughout the week of these rankings: quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. This is our new YouTube channel, okay? YouTube.com/footballguysfantasy. If you're listening on the podcast right now, head on over to YouTube because we've got these great tiers of the rankings that you can look at as you're listening to us. That way you get that visual stimuli there. That's important, Dave, for the kids. The visual stimuli helps them learn, retain information better. And if you're already watching us on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed to the channel, you like the video, share it with your friends, leave a comment telling us which ranking you love, you hate, you think we're crazy for having Justin Jefferson at wide receiver 5. That's cool. Let us know in the comments. And if you're listening on the podcast, when you finish this episode, make sure to leave a review. It is such a big help for us, and it lets us know that you care, that you're listening, and we can take your suggestions. You want to hear something on the show? We'll do it for you. Just leave that in a review. All right, Dave, let's hop into the second tier here, where you already talked about Amon-Ra St.Brown at 4. What makes us put Justin Jefferson at 5? Is it just strictly change of quarterback? Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Sam Darnold, a little spooky. J.J. McCarthy, a rookie, a little spooky.
Seeing ghosts.
Yeah, I mean, we know. Good callback. That was good.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But yeah, I mean, that's really it. Like, Justin Jefferson, phenomenal. Like, talent-wise, he is in the Tyreek Hill and Jamar Chase tier. But, sometimes that just isn't enough. And that's the difference for me. When we look at the guys that are ahead of him, we know Jared Goff can support a fantasy-relevant wide receiver because we saw him do it last year. We know Joe Burrow can do it. We know Tua Tagovailoa can do it. We know Dak Prescott can do it. I don't know if Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy can do it, and it's just as simple as that for me.
The rest of the guys in this tier, we are in absolute lockstep, actually, by the way.
Disgusting.
All the way until wide receiver 13. Ugh. We have the exact same ranking, so there's going to be very little dissension here. It's disgusting. It makes me want to vomit. These guys are all great in this tier. Yeah. These guys are all absolute stars. At 9, we have Marvin Harrison Jr., and I have seen very few people just be normal about this and say that this is where he needs to be. There are people saying he needs to go higher, and there's people saying he's a rookie, he's got to go lower. I'm just begging the masses, be normal about Marvin Harrison Jr., Dave.
Yeah, well, call me Goldilocks then, because I think that wide receiver 9 is just right. I don't think he should be any higher. I don't think he should be any lower. I think this is exactly where he
Kluge
belongs.
locks. I was thinking of a good name there.
Feels weird ranking a rookie this high, but this is just it's the perfect storm. We know Marvin Harrison, generational prospect. We know this about him. Just fourth overall in the draft. He's got a great quarterback. He's on a pass first offense. He's got little target competition. The target competition he does have in Trey McBride operates in a very different part of the field than he does. So we've seen over the last couple of years there isn't this huge learning curve for wide receivers anymore. The pro game and the college game start to resemble each other quite a bit, and we see it happen quickly. And there's no reason to think Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't going to be a fantasy contributor as early as week 1. So all the guys that are behind him in the next tier, I can nitpick little concerns that I have. Brandon Aiyuk, target competition, Chris Olave, poor quarterback play, Drake London, had a little dip in his
Don't
metrics
you
going into
dare.
year 2. Mike
Don't you
Evans getting
dare.
up there in age. There really isn't anything to pick in Marvin Harrison's outlook other than he's a rookie and we haven't seen him do it before, but his ceiling is just as high as any wide receiver in fantasy this year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, at least what it appears is that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to go right into that DeAndre Hopkins role that we saw years ago with Kyler Murray, and that offense was incredibly successful. And DeAndre Hopkins was very, very, very good for fantasy. Let's go to the next tier, tier 3. We start at number 10, Brandon Aiyuk. At 11, Chris Olave. 12, Drake London. 13, Mike Evans. 14, Davante Adams. 15, Michael Pittman Jr. And 16, Nico Collins. So let's start here with number 12, Drake London, who we both agree on. I think there's a very realistic path for Drake London to be top 10 in targets, which usually being top 10 in targets leads to being a top 10 wide receiver for fantasy. It is what it is. Volume is the name of the game for receivers. And it's like you said, Dave, you said this in previous episodes, and we've said it throughout the years here, is that it is easy to determine wide receiver volume. It is so much easier to figure out than something for a running back, right? And over the last 2 seasons, the Falcons have had some of the lowest pass attempts per game. It has been really rough for the Falcons. While the Vikings with Kirk Cousins and the Rams with Zach Robinson have been so much higher. And now the Falcons have Kirk Cousins under center. They have Zach Robinson, former quarterbacks coach for the Rams, now as the offensive coordinator in Atlanta. We're talking about a very, very different offense. We're talking about an offense that's probably adding 7, 8, maybe even 9 more pass attempts per game. They may not sound like a lot, but that is big when it comes to just wide receivers earning more targets. And that's what Drake London does. Last season, Drake London was at a 28% target share. In his rookie year, 22%. Right now, Dave, I've got him projected around 25% target share on approximately 35 pass attempts per game. You punch it into the calculator. Quick math tells you 149 targets. Looking at where that would have put him in previous years, that would have put him as the 10th in targets last year, right where Keenan Allen was at 150. Or the year before in 2022, that would have been top 6. That would have been 6th in targets in the NFL. Drake London has a really good opportunity in front of him here with some very reasonable projections that if Kirk Cousins is healthy and Drake London is healthy, he could really boom here in 2024.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the talent. This is a guy. Remind me, was it 8th overall that London was drafted? I mean, I
I
know
think
he
so.
was
Yeah.
a top 10 pick. Yeah,
Yeah.
like we know the talent is there, and this guy's just been held back by poor quarterback play. Talked about how I'm a little bit lower on Justin Jefferson because of the loss of Kirk Cousins. So it's very easy to move Drake London up because of the addition of Kirk Cousins. We know Cousins can support fantasy relevant wide receivers. So I don't have a ton of pushback here. I'm actually in a draft right now, a super flex draft where at the 3-4 turn, I was able to get Drake London and was just blown away that he was falling that far. If you look in best ball drafts right now, single quarterback, you got to pay up for him. Like people realize it when you start looking at projections. It's like, well, they're going to throw the ball a lot, and well, Drake London is going to pull a lot of those targets. So he's going in the early second right now in best ball drafts, and I think that's totally reasonable.
Yeah. I know we're doing a lot of projection here for a guy that has never finished top 12, and we're just like, yep, top 12. No argument from us. It's the talent, it's the situation, it's everything that's going on there in Atlanta. Now, as we move down, we get to wide receiver 14, where Davante Adams is at. I have him as wide receiver 14. Dave, you have him as wide receiver 17. So let's talk about this because we saw what Gardner Minshew was able to do for Michael Pittman Jr. last year,
Mhm.
averaging 10 targets per game. Davante Adams averaged 10.8 targets per game under Antonio Pierce and with Aiden O'Connell. He was a wide receiver 7 in fantasy. So what makes you look at this and say, gosh, I cannot put him at wide receiver 14. I can't even put him 15 or 16, 17. I get it. He's a little bit older. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I like to look at per game metrics more than I like to look at overall finishes. And he was the per game wide receiver 15. So he stayed healthy. And I think that's what helped him kind of with his end of year finish. But he wasn't the same player that we've seen in years past. And now he's got more target competition with the addition of Brock Bowers there. He's a year older as well. And that's when things start to get concerning. If you look, he's going into his age 32 season. Over the last 5 years, we've only seen 2 wide receivers, age 32 or older, go for 1,000 yards. Now, Davante Adams could absolutely be the outlier here, but on a team with Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer, there's going to be a lot of target competition. Last year, I think what Michael Pittman had going for him is there was nobody else there to catch the ball, so he was just getting force-fed from Gardner Minshew. I'm not saying it's impossible, but his ceiling does leave a lot to be desired. I think that we're probably going to see, the days of him being just a consistent top 3 fantasy wide receiver are well behind him now. Where he's getting drafted right now, I'm passing on him. I'm a little bit more confident in him kind of finishing as a middling wide receiver 2 rather than the high end wide receiver 2, low end wide receiver 1 that people are drafting him to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it and I get the target competition thing. I think even if he goes down to like 8 targets per game, that's still where guys were like Mike Evans, DJ Moore, Chris Olave. That's where they were last year. And so I'm still fairly confident in Davante Adams. I get that he's older. I do think he can be the outlier just because he is that talented. But I do get your concerns, and especially seeing the players that you do have ranked ahead of him, Nico Collins and Michael Pittman. Those are players with potentially higher ceilings, but you are also talking about some similar things like target competition, especially for Nico Collins with Stefon Diggs and Tank Dell. And then Michael Pittman, they add Adonai Mitchell. They're going to get a full season with Jonathan Taylor. But I do get it. This is not me pushing back very hard. This is me saying I see a lot of the same things for these guys, and I get where the tiebreaker for you is going to be upside on these younger guys. They're not 32 years old. So we mentioned him. Talk to me about Michael Pittman, who you have as your wide receiver 16.
Yeah, Pittman. It's weird because he only had like 2 full games with Anthony Richardson last year, and in those games, week 1, we saw him show out 8 receptions, 97 yards, and a touchdown. That's incredible fantasy production. And then in the other game he played with Richardson, worst game of the season, he had 1 reception for 5 scoreless yards. So trying to predict what Michael Pittman is going to look like with Anthony Richardson and now with the added Adonai Mitchell, like you mentioned, it's really tough. We saw a lot more consistency with Gardner Minshew last year when he was just force feeding him targets. And I feel like I just totally copped out. I've got him ranked as my wide receiver 16 this year, and he finished as the per game wide receiver 16 last year. I like Anthony Richardson. I think that he is a much better passer than people believe, and we talked about that in our quarterback show a couple of days ago. But with Adonai Mitchell there, who plays a pretty similar game to Michael Pittman, there could be some overlap in skill sets there that could lower his ceiling a little bit. I think a lot of people are going to look at the end of season finish last year and think that Michael Pittman deserves to be drafted as kind of a back end wide receiver 1. I've got a little bit more trepidation there. I think he's a very talented player. The Colts obviously agree with the big extension that they gave him, but it's really hard for me to move him higher than wide receiver 16.
Michael Pittman and Nico Collins are the guys that we have very interchangeable there. And I think it's just how you want to view the offenses, how you want to view their ceilings. But yeah, I'm not going to fault anyone for saying Nico, Pittman, DeVonta, Mike Evans. Like those guys are all kind of in the same area.
I'll save the Nico talk, but we'll later in the show we're going to talk about this
The
Houston
other guys,
Texans trio
yeah,
because it's
there's a lot
it's
to
tough
figure
to
out.
make sense of.
Yeah, there's a lot to figure out. Let's go down to our next tier where we start off at 17. Wide receiver 17 is Deebo Samuel, where you and I have a little bit of a disagreement there. I'm lower, you're higher. 18 is DJ Moore. 19, DK Metcalf. 20, Jaylen Waddle. 21, Devontae Smith. 22, T. Higgins, which, by the way, you and I are very high on T. Higgins compared to the rest of the industry consensus.
Good.
23, Zay Flowers. And 24, Tank Dell. So this is going to be a tier where we are going to talk a lot. Why don't you kick us off at 17? You've got Deebo Samuel there. A lot of the things that you mentioned for Davante Adams about targets and target share and age and there's a few of these things going on for Deebo Samuel, but I know that he can win, he can score points in a different way. So what makes you confident that Brock Purdy can not only sustain Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, but that Deebo Samuel's going to, I mean, stay healthy within this offense?
Well, I think the age, I mean, Debo's still 28, and I will concede that Debo is probably an older 28 than a lot of other 28-year-old
Right.
receivers because of his physicality and the way that he plays. I kind of look at Debo. I don't look at him on the wide receiver age curve. I don't look at him on the running back age curve, but I kind of make this like curve in the middle of running backs and wide receivers, and that's the Debo age curve. And there is some concern that he's getting up there with the usage and the way that he plays. But at the end of the day, man, when he's on the field, he's still just a baller. He was the wide receiver 13 in per game scoring last year. I think what we saw in 2021, he's never going to recapture that magic where he was like, for half of the season, he was like a 34% target
Cheat
share
code.
player. Then in the second half of the season, he was like, oh, now I'm goal line back. And, Christian McCaffrey came in and kind of took that Debo role that made him so valuable a couple of years ago. The problem with Debo obviously is the target competition here, and that makes him a volatile week to week player. But his weekly ceiling is so high. I mean, last year we saw he had 20 plus points in 6 games last year, including a couple of 30 burgers. He's not a guy that I want to like draft Debo Samuel to be my wide receiver one. But if I can get him at the 2-3 turn as my wide receiver two or my wide receiver three to match up with one of those elite guys that we talked about earlier, like if I've got a Tyreek Hill and Amon-Ra St.Brown and Jamar Chase, one of those guys already, and then I can get myself a good running back and then Deebo Samuel is my wide receiver two, that's what I want to do. The week to week consistency, lack of week to week consistency, means he's not a guy I want to rely on as my wide receiver one, but that weekly upside makes him a perfect target as a wide receiver two or wide receiver three.
I just worry a little bit about how many footballs get to go around. And I think that a lot of people are really underestimating how much Ricky Pearsall can get used here.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm just a little too high on Pearsall, but I get a bugaboo about it when Pearsall can do some of the same things that Debo does. He's not a Debo comp. Don't get crazy with it, but I'm saying he can run the ball out of the backfield. He can take jet sweeps. He can work out of the slot. He can work out wide. And
And
they
so can
invested.
McCaffrey, and so can Aiyuk,
I,
and so can
yeah,
Kittle. Like, all
right.
of
And I'm
those
just
guys
saying
are
now you
so
add one
versatile.
more. You add one more with first round
Yeah.
draft capital.
Mhm.
It's just it gives me the scaries. It gives me the scaries a little bit. So let's recap these rankings here. At 18, it's DJ Moore. 19, DK Metcalf, who, by the way, I thought I was high on him at 20. You're high on him at 19. I can be talked into continuing to move DK Metcalf up. I think that Seahawks offense is going to be phenomenal. At 20, Jaylen Waddle. 21, Davante Smith. At 22, T. Higgins. I've got him at 21. Dave, you've gone at 22. I've seen a lot of places where he's getting ranked as the wide receiver 30. Dave, like this is it does not make sense to me. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here with the
Yeah,
T. Higgins
please
stuff
take the
because
mic.
he's pretty much been a top 15 wide receiver everywhere in rankings in previous years. And now all of a sudden we get 1 year where Joe Burrow is hurt, T. Higgins is hurt, and the whole Bengals offense falls off a cliff. And we're like, no, T. Higgins isn't a starter in fantasy. The Bengals didn't do anything. They didn't trade him away. They didn't bring in more help. They drafted Jermaine Burton, who's fine. He's going to go into that Tyler Boyd role. There's so much recency bias where we have to toss out the Joe Burrow stuff, the Jake Browning stuff that happened last year, the T. Higgins stuff last year. He was dealing with injury as well. They go and the Bengals draft offensive line. They get help for Joe Burrow. They get help for this offense. And then we go back and look. T. Higgins, wide receiver 22 and wide receiver 17 in back-to-back seasons. And we see that and we say, no, it's fine. Wide receiver 30. 3 straight years of 100 plus targets. No, wide receiver 30. Back to back seasons with 1,000 yards. No, wide receiver 30. Guys, what are we doing? He's being drafted on Underdog right now as the wide receiver 27 behind Stefon Diggs, Malik Nabers, who's never played a single snap and will have Daniel Jones as his quarterback. He's going behind Cooper Kupp, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, all guys that we have personally ranked behind him. I do not get this. I think T. Higgins, if this stays like this, could end up being the best, not one of, but the best value in fantasy drafts. If he keeps going as a wide receiver 3 and people in your home leagues start to say, oh, yeah, he was injured and the Bengals, they weren't good. And I'm telling you, I absolutely love the T. Higgins average draft position and the value you're getting. I'm going to keep him up here at wide receiver 21.
Yeah, and last year too, you didn't even mention it. Like, he was getting drafted in the 3rd round. In week 1, he came out, and the targets were there. He had 8 targets, and he caught 0 passes. You know
Yeah.
how bad that stung for people that invested a third round pick in T. Higgins. He's a talented player, not concerned in the slightest. And
Nope.
right now, you talk about him being one of the best values in draft. I mentioned this draft that I'm in earlier where I was able to get Drake London at the 3-4 turn. I was able to get T. Higgins in the 6th round
Oh,
of a
it's
draft
gorgeous.
right now as my wide receiver 4. Just absolutely mind blowing the disrespect right now. And I think the big concern is like, well, what if he holds out or what if he gets traded? And those concerns are reasonable, but I am projecting and ranking T. Higgins as a Cincinnati Bengal. And assuming T. Higgins is a Cincinnati Bengal this year, yeah, I don't know how you can have him outside your top 20.
Let's do a little in the field reporting because at a local event, a child asked T. Higgins, where are you going to be playing? Are you going to be playing for the Bengals this year?" And he said, "Yes, I expect to be playing for the Cincinnati Bengals." So he
Yep.
is not demanding any kind of trade. And that child did some excellent
Thank you, little
reporting.
child, field
Yes,
reporter.
thank you, small child. All right, let's move down here to the end of our tier where we've got Zay Flowers and Tank Dell back to back. Zay Flowers gets propped up by me. I have him at wide receiver 23, but you've got Tank Dell as your we both have him as our wide receiver 25. That puts him at 24th overall for our consensus. You've got Tank Dell over Zay Flowers. So let's wrap on these guys really quickly here. What makes you put Tank Dell over Zay Flowers? Because they're very similar players.
Mhm.
I would say I wouldn't say similar quarterbacks, but star power at the quarterback position, offenses that can score. For me, the tiebreaker was Zay is going to be the top receiver on his team, whereas Tank is going to have a bit more competition for that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think you're right that like there's similar quarterbacks in star power, but I'm looking right now. I mean, CJ Stroud threw for more yards last year in his rookie season than Lamar Jackson has ever thrown for in a season. So I think it's
Okay.
just a much bigger pie. I love talking about pie.
I was
It's
about to say, you
breakfast
can't
this
keep
morning.
bringing up pie,
I know,
man.
I know. I
Messes me
need a
up.
slice of pie right now, but really, it comes down there is ambiguity in this trio of receivers right now. And I've got Collins as wide receiver 15. I've got Diggs as my wide receiver 24. And I have Dell as my wide receiver 25. So technically, the way I'm ranking it is I expect Dell to be the wide receiver 3, but he could have such a high weekly ceiling, and I think that the ambiguity is why I'm ranking him low, but he could very easily finish as a wide receiver 1. I mean, we saw it before his injury where he was starting to kinda not necessarily take over, but it was like a 50-50 split with he and Nico Collins, and Tank Dell was pulling more targets, and he was pulling more valuable targets deeper downfield, and he was doing more after the catch with his yak ability. Really, and that, like, usually when you look at a trio of wide receivers. You can say, okay, well, this guy's going to play the X, this guy's going to play the Z, this guy's going to play the slot. I don't know what it's going to look like in Houston because if you look at their alignment rates last year, I'm not going to like bore you with the numbers, but they were deployed very similarly, around 30% out of the slot, around 70% out wide. All of these players are so versatile. We know Bobby Slowick is just like a mastermind with what he can do on offense. He's going to have so much fun moving these guys around the formation. We can see them run the same play back to back to back times and have all of these wide receivers in different configurations on every single play. I mean, that is the type of versatility that we have here. So I'm willing to throw darts at all these guys. And even though Tank Dell is technically ranked as my wide receiver 3 in Houston, I'm very much so in on him.
We've got them just slightly above their average draft position. So an underdog, Tank Dell is going as the wide receiver 26. Zay Flowers is going as the wide receiver 25. So we've got them just a little bit ahead. And by the way, on some other early average draft position for non-best ball, just redraft leagues, money leagues, right now Zay Flowers is going a bit later as the wide receiver 28. Tank Dell going as the wide receiver 26. So small values for small receivers, but it's there. It's
And I
there.
also think it's important to
I
say
think the
that.
value is going to be bigger on Zay Flowers.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say that there's a difference between projections and rankings. And if you're looking at projections, Zay Flowers projects better than Tank Dell because he is going to be the wide receiver 1. But when you're looking at rankings, you're looking more at range of outcomes. And well, right now, Tank Dell doesn't project as good as Zay Flowers. There's a world
There's
where
a
Tank
world.
Dell isn't the wide receiver 3 and he's the wide receiver 2 or he's the wide receiver 1,
Well,
and
it could be
we have to
one.
bank that upside into his ranking. So like when you start projecting it, if you project Tank Dell to be the wide receiver 3, he probably falls into like the wide receiver 36, wide receiver 40 range, but the possibility that he's not the wide receiver 3 and that he does
for the
leapfrog ahead
Ravens.
of Nico Collins. Well, what was that?
I just wanted to like clarify when we say he could be the wide receiver 3, we mean for the Texans, excuse me,
Right. Yeah,
for his team.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you got to bake upside into rankings. So just kind of explaining the difference between projections and rankings here that we don't know. And because of that ambiguity and because we know that it's going to be a good offense, I think we're willing to rank these guys a little bit higher than they project because of the potential upside.
Yeah. For me, it's I guess we do need to define, right? Zay Flowers is the wide receiver 1. How much more valuable is that compared to the Houston Texans wide receiver 2 or the Houston Texans wide receiver 3? So right now, I do like the upside of Zay Flowers because they didn't draft another wide receiver. They do lose Odell Beckham, who took up 64 targets.
Devontae
It,
Walker, I think he was a fourth round
yeah,
pick, right?
fourth
Yeah.
rounder. He's
Yeah.
got a lot to develop. He's got a lot to develop, man. Like
They lost
he's not
Odell,
there.
who was like pulling a pretty meaningful target share last
64
year.
targets, man.
Yeah,
That's
I think
64 balls available now for Nelson Aguilar. No, come on.
I mean, the hope is that Rashad Bateman can
That's
finally
the
be
hope.
the guy.
That's the
Please.
hope.
Because I've been
That's
drafting a
the hope.
lot of him late too.
Well, I think what we want to see is, Derrick Henry there, the Baltimore Ravens, they're going to be facing a lot heavier boxes where the defenders are going to be coming down trying to stop this run. We could see a lot more of the intermediate and deep routes with Zay Flowers that we never saw last year that we were clamoring for. And he's also not coming off of an injury. And I think that's where my tiebreaker was with these guys. But both of them really good. Bet on talent. And typically you want to bet on second year players breaking out even further, especially when they're in good offenses. So love these guys. And especially when you can get them at the end of this tier, it's just phenomenal value. Let's move down. At 25 in our next tier, we've got Amari Cooper. 26, Cooper Kupp. Back-to-back Coopers. 27, Stefon Diggs. 28, Malik Nabers. 29, George Pickens. 30, Christian Kirk. 31, Rashee Rice, which we have no idea what's going to happen there. That can go up,
If they
down,
say no
anywhere.
suspension, he's going up like 4 rounds.
At 32, Deontay Johnson. Now, this tier feels like it is littered with landmines and then also just some gold. It seems like there could be some incredible values in this tier, but there could also be guys that don't necessarily kill your team, but if you're drafting them to be a starter in 3 wide receiver leagues or to be your flex, it can get a little tough. You want to talk about Cooper Kupp, who we have at 26. I've got him as the wide receiver 24. You've got him as the wide receiver 28. Honestly, even as I'm reading that, I'm saying I might need to drop Cooper Kupp more. I don't feel comfortable.
It's so hard to rank him this year. I feel like this is
It really is.
so kind of similar to like the Derrick Henry conversation we had on the running back show earlier, where he's getting up there in age and the efficiency is dwindling. I mean, going into last year, he was my wide receiver 1, and oof, regret that one a little bit. But I mean, you look at what he was doing in the 2 years prior, double-digit fantasy points in every single outing in 2021 and 2022. He had 20 plus points in 80% of his games. He had 30 plus points in 32% of his games. He was averaging over 25 points per game over a 2-year stretch. That is mind blowing to do at the wide receiver position. And then he got hurt, kind of lost his role to Puka Nacua. But still, there's this narrative, this misconception that Cooper Kupp is just dust now. He's still at 100 plus yards in 4 games last year. So there is a bit of a weekly ceiling, but it is rare. If you see a guy 30, 31, 32 years old start trending downward, it's very rare to see those guys bounce back. Now, we did see it last year with Keenan Allen, right? 2022, everybody wrote Keenan Allen off for dead, and then he bounced back in a huge way in 2023. So it is possible, and that's why we're ranking him where we are, because we want to be able to just kind of capture that upside. But man, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if Puka Nacua just dominates the way that he did last year. Cooper Kupp finishes as like the wide receiver 40, wide receiver 50, and then just kind of rides off into the sunset in 2025.
You mentioned the older guys, and it's the ones that can run routes really well. They last. They last in the league. It's the
Mhm.
Davante Adams, it's Stefon Diggs, it's DeAndre Hopkins, it's Cooper Kupp. It's just, can Cooper Kupp be healthy? Can
Yeah.
Matthew Stafford be healthy? It's not just Kupp who has the health concerns, it's Stafford. There's quite a bit here. Now, that Rams defense probably won't be as good, so there could be even more passing than we've ever seen. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how his ADP goes up and down throughout the summer. I want to go to our next guy here, because at 30, we have Christian Kirk. And this is one of our players we have some of our biggest dissension on. I've got Christian Kirk as wide receiver 26. You've got him at wide receiver 34. I look at it this way. Calvin Ridley is out. They replace him with Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis. Brian Thomas Jr. needs to develop. Gabe Davis never did. These are two guys that are downfield threats. They're explosive play merchants. They are going to be guys that are opening things up for the rest of the offense. Christian Kirk remains the target leader on this team, in my opinion, working out of the slot like he has been last season. 7.6 targets per game. We're better than Zay Flowers, better than Tank Dell, better than Jaylen Waddle, better than Brandon Aiyuk, and a bunch of other guys. Now, I understand that you can't just look at that in a vacuum. There has to be context. Targets on other teams can be more valuable than they were on the Jaguars last year. But I think we see a better Jaguars offense this season, an improved Trevor Lawrence. Last year was rough. They just seemed like they were trying to force things with Calvin Ridley that just was not happening. Everything was just off. And I don't think we're going to be seeing that. We also got Christian Kirk hurt for most of the year. And so when you got a Trevor Lawrence that's trying to force things to Calvin Ridley, who he just does not have the chemistry with, and then no Christian Kirk, who that was his safety blanket, the Jaguars offense just went to a weird spot. And I don't think Kirk's going to get the love that he deserves because there's a new shiny toy in town and Brian Thomas Jr., who I also think is a good player, but he needs to develop a little bit more. Kirk, we've seen it. We've seen that he can be good. He was the wide receiver 26 in his final year in Arizona. He was the wide receiver 11 in 2022, just a year ago. It was not that long ago. He was wide receiver 11 in an offense where Trevor Lawrence needed him to be a target hog. And last year, before getting hurt, wide receiver 23 in points per game. He's going in Underdog as the wide receiver 30, and I think he's a phenomenal value as a guy who can be the wide receiver 3 on your roster.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of Christian Kirk and his game. I just think there's a lot of overlap with Evan Ingram and kind of what they do across the middle of the field and the short routes. I think that Brian Thomas Jr. positively impacts these guys because he is a great
Yep.
downfield threat and he's going to open up those short and intermediate routes. It's just hard for me to rank Kirk much higher than that. I didn't even realize, the where I had him ranked this year, wide receiver 34 is exactly where he finished last year. He was the per game wide receiver 34. I'm a fan of Kirk's talent, and he's a guy that I've pounded the table for years. And we hit in 2022. It was a lovely thing when a lot of people had just completely forgotten about Christian Kirk. I just I don't know. I don't have a super strong take. You and I are pretty close when it comes to rankings on him right now. I think 28 and 34. So again, we're talking like less than a round of difference in value here. I'm willing to draft him at cost. It's just hard for me to move him much higher than 34.
I had something a little higher on Christian Kirk and his points per game. We'll have to discuss that after the show behind the scenes because I had him a little bit higher. But let's move down. 32, Deontay Johnson, Carolina. I've got him at 31. You've got him at 32. And honestly, I think I could go higher with Deontay Johnson. I know that a lot of people don't like Bryce Young. We talked about him and the improvements that he can make on our quarterback rankings episode. If you haven't seen that, go check that out because this Carolina offense is going to be very different. Dave Canales is setting it up to be very different. The situation is actually better for Deontay Johnson than what he had in Pittsburgh last season. You can fight me on it. That's fine. Fight me in the comments because I think this Carolina offense and the situation with Bryce Young is better than what he was looking at last year with Kenny Pickett. And then having target competition from George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth and those running backs there. Carolina wants to get the ball out of Bryce's hands fast. Now they go and they get a wide receiver who can actually separate. Carolina was one of the worst teams at separating last year. And we saw that when Bryce did sort of get a vibe going with someone, it was Adam Thielen, a guy who's a good route runner, but he just doesn't have it in him athletically to separate very well anymore. And by week 11, Adam Thielen was the wide receiver 10 in fantasy football, averaging nearly 10 targets per game. He was getting 9.7 targets per game. Absolutely nuts. I think we could see something similar for Deontay Johnson, who's averaged 8.3 targets per game in his career. And then just to give you the cherry on top here for the value of Deontay Johnson, the Panthers traded for him. This isn't a guy that sort of fell into their laps or that they signed on like a vet minimum deal or something like that. They had an exact mission in their mind for why they wanted to get Deontay Johnson and why he made sense for their quarterback. And I always love that when it comes to fantasy value. And honestly, as I'm saying this, I'm going to be moving Deontay Johnson up my rankings, Dave.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Deontay Johnson. I've loved this guy for years. We talked about it in the quarterback show where I said, like, I don't have a ton of faith in Bryce Young, but I keep drafting him because I'm aggressively targeting Deontay Johnson so much in best ball drafts. And then round 16, 17, 18 rolls around, and I'm like, well, might as well finish the stack out and draft Bryce Young here. And my love, I guess you can say, for Bryce Young comes solely on the back of my love for Deontay Johnson. I think he's such a good player. I think the Panthers really got the guy that they were looking for and the missing piece in this offense. So I'm in complete agreement with you. Probably too low on Deontay Johnson, but because of how bad Bryce Young was last year, it's hard to move
Right.
him up much higher. But he could absolutely smash that wide receiver 30 tag that we got on him right now.
Let's go down to our next tier where it starts off with 33, Keenan Allen, 34, Calvin Ridley, 35, Terry McLaurin, 36, Jaden Reed, 37, Jordan Addison, 38, DeAndre Hopkins, 39, Christian Watson. And that's the whole tier. Dave, at 33, Keenan Allen being the guy there. This is odd for us to see him this low. He's been so good for so
Mhm.
many years, super talented. And we just said the older guys can still thrive when they are good route runners. And we know that for Keenan Allen, which lends to being a target hog. But you and I are both a bit lower on him. I've got him at wide receiver 33. You've got him at wide receiver 31. A lot of that has to do with Rome Odunze. A lot of that has to do with a pass catching running back, DeAndre Swift. A lot of that has to do with multiple tight ends being there in Chicago. A lot of that
You
has to
mentioned
do
DJ Moore.
with
DJ Moore
with
is the guy.
because he was an understood. But
Yeah.
now you throw all of that with a rookie quarterback, and you typically don't see great wide receiver fantasy performances from a rookie quarterback. So talk to us a little bit about Keenan Allen here.
There's just so much history working against him. I dropped the stat earlier when talking about Davante Adams, wide receivers age 32 and older. We've only seen 2 seasons with 1,000+ yards in the last 5 years. In addition to that, we have never seen a rookie quarterback support multiple wide receivers with 1,000+ yards. Now, 1,000+ yards, lofty projection, of course, but that's just kind of what I keep going back to because if you're drafting a wide receiver, you want to get 1,000 yards out of them. And I don't think that there's really a path for Keenan Allen to do that. I guess you can kind of play the narrative that Keenan Allen is so good at working underneath and so good at getting open immediately off the line that he could be the wide receiver one here in Chicago. But I think that Rome Odunze and DJ Moore are probably going to be the preferred targets of Caleb Williams, the guys he's going to want to build a long lasting connection with. There's just you already mentioned the target competition: DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, the pass catching running backs as well. We would need a historic rookie season from Caleb Williams, which is certainly in the range of outcomes, but we would need him to do things that no rookie quarterback has ever done before to support three pass catching wide receivers. So for me, we usually see rookies just kind of hyper fixate on one wide receiver. And I think DJ Moore is the best wide receiver of the bunch. So I've got him ranked higher than all the other Bears wide receivers. I still have DJ Moore lower than consensus. It's just really hard for me to envision a world where Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze could also have week to week consistency. We might see some boom weeks here and there, but it's going to be really, really tough to draft them and confidently plug them in your lineup week to week.
I still love
Just
Keenan
a
Allen
lot
as a
of red
player.
flags.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, there's tons. There's tons. I still love Keenan Allen as a player. I think it's a great football move for the Chicago Bears and for Caleb Williams. This also just isn't Caleb's style to be like the quick check, get the ball out of my hands fast. Like
Right.
he's
Right.
always going for that big play, extending the plays as best as he can. And I think you're right. I think we're going to see some very splashy plays from DJ Moore. I think there's going to be a really good connection with him and Roma Dunze. We see that quite often when rookies go to mini camp together. And these are first round picks that are being touted as the future of Chicago. They're going everywhere together, doing press tours together, everything. These guys are going to have a bond. And that's kind of the intangible thing that we don't talk about too much in fantasy football, but it's going to be there.
I
Let's
say
keep moving down.
Caleb
Yeah.
Williams was at the Cubs game the other day, and it was Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, and Cole Kmet sitting up in the skybox. Keenan Allen nowhere to be found. Just saying.
Uh-oh. Red flags. Red flags for Keenan Allen. Let's keep moving down. 34 is Calvin Ridley. 35, Terry McLaurin. 36, Jaden Reed. And at 37, Jordan Addison. Now, Jordan Addison is at 37 because I've got him ranked at wide receiver 41, and Dave, you've got him at 36. Now, I know for some people that might sound nuts because Jordan Addison had a good portion of the year last year. He's a talented young receiver on what should be a good offense. Keyword there, should be. We have no idea what's going to happen with the quarterback play. Is it Sam Darnold? And honestly, guys, I don't know that JJ McCarthy coming in and starting is going to be better than Sam Darnold. I really, really don't believe that. Remember, this is a guy, JJ McCarthy, who in 2022, his pass attempts were lower than Drake May's pass completions. Like, this is a guy who does not have a lot of experience throwing the ball. It's going to take time. So this Vikings offense might struggle this year. And that's not even to mention Jordan Addison's splits with and without Justin Jefferson last year. So in 10 games with Justin Jefferson, we're looking at 11.8 fantasy points per game for Jordan Addison. The 7 games without, all of a sudden he boomed up to nearly 15 fantasy points per game. And the 11 fantasy points per game would have made him the wide receiver 37. That was with having Kirk Cousins around. That was with having Josh Dobbs, who knew the offense. That was with having incredible touchdown variance, by the way, 10 touchdowns as a rookie.
Yep.
Everything was swinging Jordan Addison's way. I don't think we see that again. I think the touchdown variance can regress. I do think that the quarterback situation might be rougher than we want to admit. And even if the Vikings offense is good, I don't think the ceiling is very high. So if we're wrong about him at wide receivers 36 and wide receiver 41, I don't know that we're that wrong. This isn't one of those cases where he's, a top 12 or top 20 wide receiver. He's maybe wide receiver 35, wide receiver 30, something like that. I don't like the profile for him this year. I don't like what everything looks like for the Vikings. It's very concerning for me, Dave.
Yeah, and he's I hate to say it, but he's definitely a better in best ball type of guy because he does have that playmaking ability where he
You
can
said
score
the
a
thing. You
70-yard
said the
touchdown.
thing.
I did, and he can score like a 70-yard touchdown in any given week, and
Right.
that's great because all of a sudden, you got a guy that you drafted as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, and he just gave you a relevant week in best ball. But like, when are you ever going to feel comfortable starting Sam Darnold's wide receiver 2, who's also going to be playing behind TJ Hawkinson later in the year? There's just a lot of concern there. I think Jordan Addison, from like a dynasty standpoint, long term, I'm a-okay buying Jordan Addison, even if he gets off to a slow start this year. But 2024 projections are pretty rough for him.
As we keep going down this list, and we've got at 38, it's DeAndre Hopkins. At 39, Christian Watson. And for me, Christian Watson, there's so much here that's exactly like Jordan Addison, but there's some positive here. One, it's a much better offense, it's a better quarterback, and it's a guy who is hashtag better in best ball. He gets the touchdown variance, all that. But the difference here is that the Packers do not have a Justin Jefferson on their team. They also don't have a Sam Darnold throwing the football. To me, Christian Watson is a high upside play in that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range that I think the ceiling is much higher than Jordan Addison. I know the fears are injuries with the hamstrings. The story has been, and I do like take some weight with this, that he's been visiting specialists throughout the offseason to figure out what's going on with his hamstrings. Because oftentimes for these athletes, it's how they prep for games. It's how they treat their workouts. It's how they treat their bodies. Are they stretching properly? Are they lifting correctly? Are they doing the right mobility movements? And we saw it with Christian McCaffrey. For years, he was not doing the right thing. He was doing beach body type lifting workouts rather than focusing on flexibility of his body with yoga. And that's what he started to do. And Christian McCaffrey, he's not this injury prone guy that he was seen as before. So
Oh, don't you say it.
I'm
Don't
I'm
you
just
jinx
saying
Christian McCaffrey.
he's not being seen that way anymore.
Right. Yeah.
He's not.
Everyone's injury prone until they're not.
Right. And Christian Watson, I get it. He has had the struggles with injuries, but I'm fine taking him here where he's going. And the average draft position is just so low. I'll say this, there's talent. There's talent there. The Packers just do not have that alpha yet. I love Jayden Reed. I touted Jayden Reed last year. He's a good slot player. He's a very nice complementary piece in that offense. What I love here with Christian Watson is he can still win in man coverage. He was really good against man coverage last year,
Mhm.
top 15 in both yards per route run and target per route run against man. This team still lacks that alpha. I'm just going to say it. They really do. Christian Watson can be that guy if he stays healthy. It's a very high value pick for me, going as the wide receiver 3 or 4 in terms of his ADP. And I love being able to add that kind of upside player to my roster.
Yeah, the ceiling's undeniable there. I don't really have too much to add. We know that if he can stay healthy, he's probably going to be the wide receiver 1 here. We know Jordan Love is good. Those were the concerns last year with Christian Watson. Was like, yeah, well, maybe Jordan Love is going to
Uh-huh.
suck. Do we really want to draft Christian Watson? Turns out Jordan Love isn't the hurdle. It was his health. And yeah, I am always the guy willing to just buy these dips on injured players. And that's what I'll be doing this year on Christian Watson.
And by the way, I think the other Packers receivers are also good values too. Dontavian Wicks, excellent
Mhm.
value. Jaden Reed, still an excellent value. And it's because there's so much ambiguity in this situation. I don't even
I'll
think
throw some
there's a
darts at
best
Bo
or worst
Melton
draft.
in round 18. I don't care. I'll draft
Sure.
anybody on this Packers offense.
Romeo Dobbs feels like the guy that's getting left out. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. All right, let's keep moving down here into our next tier. At 40, we've got Chris Godwin, who I'm a bit higher on than you, Dave. And for me, I just think it's he was recovering from injury last year. He was playing out of his normal slot position last
Report
year. He
just
was
came out that he's going to be playing out of the
I
slot.
was going to mention that. Yep. That he was playing 67% of his snaps out wide. And the report is the Bucks offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen, wants to put him back in the slot. So good. Awesome. Like that's what I want to see. So Chris Godwin, I think, is fine here around the wide receiver 40 spot. At 41, Marquise Brown. We've got to see what's going on with the Chiefs there. At 42, Jackson Smith-Njigba. 43, Lad McConkey. 44, Rome Odunze. 45, Brian Thomas Jr. 46, Tyler Lockett. 47, Cortland Sutton. Whew, we did it. 48, Jacoby Myers. So I want to talk about Jackson Smith-Njigba really quick because it's another guy that we're a little split on. I've got him ranked 8 spots higher than you do. He's my wide receiver 39. He's your wide receiver 47. Maybe I'm getting too high on this Seahawks offense, but I really love the prospect of them doing what Todd Monken was able to do for the Ravens last year, which
Right.
is create explosive plays downfield with a bunch of really good weapons. And we got really quick to dismiss JSN last year because, well, he was the first wide receiver drafted. He didn't play like it. Yeah, he also got dropped into a team that had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. He also got dropped into an offense that had a bunch of rookies along the offensive line. He got dropped into an offense that was not playing up to par. And honestly, it was just straight up malpractice what they were doing to Jackson Smith-Njigba. So Ryan Grubb comes in. This is the offensive coordinator from the Washington Huskies in college football. He brings in his vertical attack. So this is going to be very different for JSN. And I go back and look of the 80 players to record at least 50 targets last season. Jackson Smith-Njigba had the 77th lowest average depth of target at just 6.1 yards. It's nuts that you are using this guy who's so good at tracking the ball downfield from the slot, which, by the way, in college, 12.1 average depth of target, twice as much. And then you take him and you confine him to this silly little role where he's only catching passes within 6 yards of the line of scrimmage. Ryan Grubb did a great job of utilizing his slots on deep routes last season with Washington. You see 3 of his wide receivers go early in the NFL
Mhm.
draft. Jalen Polk, Rome Odunze. They were at 14 yards or more on average depth of target. Jalen McMillan, the slot guy, who this is going to be the prime example for JSN. In his down year, Jalen McMillan was at 10.1 yards for average depth of target. And in 2022, it was 13.2. I know I'm giving you a bunch of numbers, but what I'm saying here is Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be running his routes further downfield, getting targeted more often because this offense does utilize the slot and it does utilize 3 wide receivers. And these targets are going to be much more valuable. So that's why I'm fine ranking him at wide receiver 39. And I think that the average draft position for JSN, especially another high upside second year player that can break out, to me, it's juicy. I want as much JSN on my teams as possible.
Yeah, he's going to be a guy we're going to see his ADP creep up a little bit. I keep eyeballing JSN in my best ball drafts, like willing to reach around for him, and then he still gets sniped on me. So he's already a guy that's going well ahead of his ADP. Big fan of the talent, and something I think that is lost in all of this is that he was injured in minicamp last year.
Yep.
Like he missed all of training camp and then had to slowly ramp up during his rookie season. We saw the flashes there last year, but yeah, I'm big on JSN. Huge dynasty target for me to get right now. I'm trying to buy him wherever I can. Cautiously optimistic about 2024. I want to see it before I'm willing to draft him in redraft. But we know the talent is there. I think the concern is with target competition with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett with his recent extension. But if Seattle takes that step forward, like you're projecting, JSN could smash this wide receiver 40-ish tag that we got on him.
Well, there we have it. 48 wide receivers ranked for our early fantasy football rankings. And like we've mentioned, this is going to change all throughout the summer. These rankings are fluid. They have changed within the last hour. They have changed within the last week, and they will continue to change all throughout the summer. We're going to do more videos on this, more podcasts on this. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel. You like this video as well. Leave a comment, maybe someone you want to see higher or lower, someone we left off the list that should be on there. Let us know, and we'll try to put that into our next video. And guess what? If you want to remain updated on everything, not just the video stuff that we're doing, be sure to subscribe to the daily news updates from football guys. Okay. It's going to give you everything that you need to win in fantasy football, sent straight to you every single day from the man himself, Joe Bryant.